Good evening, everyone. I am Yogita and I work for Renix Life Sciences as a content writer. I am the moderator for today's session. I am delighted to welcome you all to today's session. Ms. Ishita Narvekar will be addressing our 15th Cell Talk webinar on the topic entitled Association of Multidimensional Poverty with Dementia in Adults aged 50 years or older in South Africa. Ishita is working as a junior economics at Renix. She is currently pursuing MA in economics from the Mumbai School of Economics and Public Policy. She had worked as a public policy intern at the International Institute of SDGs and Public Policy Research. Her work at Renix involves collecting micro and macro data related to GDP, healthcare, and other topics, and then analyzing this data for writing research papers for journal publication. So without further delay, let's continue with Ishita.
Thank you, Yogita ma'am, for your kind introduction. The paper I'm going to present today is Association of Multidimensional Poverty with Dementia aged 50 years or older in South Africa. Its authors are Jean-Francois Stanis, Jacqueline Moodley, May Thuthumo, and Ganesh Babulal. It was published in the journal JAMA Network Open on 25th March 2022. Its impact factor is 13.35. This research has impact on physicians, allied health professionals, and policymakers. Dementia is a global health challenge, and its related cost will increase during the next 3 decades, and low and middle income countries will be responsible for shouldering this economic burden. Families will have to absorb these costs because formal geriatric care is in its infancy in low and middle income countries. Moreover, adults with dementia need more financial, social, emotional, and physical support from family members. This increased need directly affects the caregiver's ability to work and attend school, especially because many individuals are tasked with providing care. It is well documented that poor social determinants of health are directly associated with any disease. However, limited research exists investigating how social determinants of health are associated with dementia. Thus, a multi-dimensional approach to poverty will offer a more precise account as to how the multiple conditions will help the policymakers. More than half of the population in South Africa lives in an income, continues to live with an income under the poverty line. Older age is considered as the main non-modifiable risk factor for dementia in Africa and other low and middle income countries. Thus, the objective of this paper was to examine the association between multidimensional poverty and dementia and the role of various dimensions of deprivation in overall poverty. Using multidimensional poverty measures, the paper hypothesized that social determinants of health are positively associated with dementia in older adults. So, a cross-sectional study of 227 adults aged 50 years or older living in Soweto, Johannesburg, South Africa was conducted. And since the access to imaging or cerebrospinal fluid biomarkers were absent, which is the most common problem in many low and middle income countries, an 8-item interview to differentiate aging and dementia, which is the AD8, and Roland Universal Dementia Assessment Scale, which is the RUDAS, was used to assess the dementia. To measure the multidimensional poverty, these 7 dimensions that are central to well-being were included. The education is associated with one's ability to gain employment and earn an income. Study participants were considered deprived if they had access only to primary education. Under health, any severe activity limitation or functioning difficulty was considered as a cutoff for deprivation of health. In economic activity, the cutoff was used if an adult was unemployed, looking for a job, or not looking for a job because the participant was discouraged, or he or she could not afford the cost of seeking work, or the wages offered were too low. In living standard was composed of three indicators: the water pipe, electricity, and flush toilet, for which deprivation within the compound was considered as the cutoff. In social participation, involvement in the community groups has been shown to enhance life satisfaction, and thus the study participants who were not involved in any group were considered deprived. Under fair treatment, discrimination and stigma were measured using a validated 22-item unfair treatment subscale of the discrimination and stigma scale, and moderate discrimination was the cutoff. And under psychological well-being, the measures of depression and self-esteem represented the deprivation of psychological well-being and are often associated with poverty. Depression was measured using a validated 10-item Center for Epidemiological Studies depression scale, revised, and a score of 10 or higher was the established cutoff. Self-esteem was measured using a 10-item Rosenberg self-esteem scale, and a score of below 15 was the established cutoff. Each dimensions were independently assessed, and the method focused on the dimensional shortfalls. Then the dimensions of multidimensional poverty measures were aggregated, and it consisted of two cutoffs. One was for each dimension and one associated the cross-cutting dimensions, and the second was the number of dimensions in which an older adult had to be deprived to be deemed multidimensionally poor. Further, the three indicators were measured: the poverty head count, that indicates the number of older adults who lived below the poverty line; the mean deprivation share, which is the mean number of dimensions of deprivations experienced by each older adult who lived below the poverty line; and the adjusted head count ratio, which is the product of poverty head count and the mean deprivation share. The adjusted head count, the third one, denotes the intensity of poverty. Also, correlation analysis assessed the overlap of dimensions of deprivation. And finally, to find out the association between dementia and multidimensional poverty, a multivariate logistic regression model was used. A person was considered as multidimensionally poor if he was deprived in 4 or more dimensions. So out of total 227 adults, 101 had dementia identified by 88, and 14 had dementia identified by Rudess, and 50 had dementia identified by both 88 and Rudess. More men than women did not have dementia, and 33 of 165 adults with dementia, compared with 6 of 62 adults without dementia, were found to be deprived in 4 dimensions or more. Here, the education, health, and employment were associated with dementia as were the main contributors to the adjusted poverty headcount ratio. Multidimensional poverty was strongly associated with dementia as measured by AD8 and Rudess, with higher odds for older women or those living in large households. This study found that adults with dementia have a higher level of multidimensional poverty in a low and middle income context. Despite the fact that dementia prevalence increases with the age, the study did not find that age is significantly strengthened the association with poverty. The deprivation of education, health, and employment were identified as major contributors to the multidimensional poverty, and access to affordable and quality universal healthcare has been promoted as essential to reducing the effect of dementia. Prevalence and depth of poverty were higher among adults with dementia. Lack of education, poor health, and unemployment were the major dimensions of poverty that were associated with a higher prevalence of dementia. Long-term interventions beginning in early life may affect social determinants of health through targeted structural policies and prevent dementia later in life. This study also has some limitations. It is not possible to establish the direction of association between poverty and dementia. It means that poverty can also be a cause as well as the consequence of dementia. The size of the sample is limited, thus reducing the statistical power to further investigate the difference in multidimensional poverty by some other socio-demographic characteristics of adults, such as age group or marital status. The AD8 and Rudess approach does not establish a formal diagnosis of dementia because of the absence of conventional biomarkers or a formal assessment of cognitive functioning. And 22.3% of participants in the sample were missing interviews, which might have created a bias in the result. And they were considered as random in the model. So this study provides an evidence for physicians, allied health professionals, and policymakers to consider daily stressors associated with multidimensional poverty and aging. It offers some valuable insights into low and middle income countries and what public policies such as access to education, a strong workforce, and quality and free universal healthcare could be prioritized that may be associated with dementia prevention and may reduce its effect on families and communities. So thank you for your patient listening.
Thank you so much, Ishita, for an enlightening and insightful talk. Now the audience is welcome to have questions. Dr. Shaheen has a question. What do you mean by poor social determinants of health? We have a question from Dr. Shaheen. What do you mean by poor social determinants of health?
So poor social determinants of health simply means that the person is deprived of the basic facilities. Like a poor person cannot afford a quality health, like they cannot receive some quality healthcare, or a person is deprived of education just because they're poor. So deprivation of basic needs is the answer to that.
Dr. Vijay has a question. Were any specific causative factors related to poverty in development of dementia were identified?
Sorry, I'm unable to hear properly. Can you please repeat the question?
Yes, sure. The question is from Dr. Vijay. Were any specific causative factors related to poverty in development of dementia were identified?
Yes, the education, unemployment, as in previous slides, I had showed that education and unemployment were the factors that affected the multidimensional poverty.
Okay.
Dr. Nupur has a question. How does the sex matter? And she also has another question. Does prevalence of dementia between poor old man and old woman differs? And if differs, why?
So in most low and middle income countries, a female usually takes care of a household and she is financially dependent on the male counterpart. So since she is not financially dependent, since she is not financially independent, she cannot take most of the decisions as observed by many studies. So that's why a female is usually deprived more than a male. And yes, by rebalancing the male and female in the old age can help to reduce the dementia too.
No, this is more prevalent in case of men or women. Is there any discussion on that?
Yes, male are more prevalent to dementia.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there any question from anyone? Okay. As there are no further questions in the chat box, so thank you, Ishita, for answering those questions and for the great presentation. It was nice to hear such a wise and instructive talk. Ishita, could you go to your final slide? Okay. Yes. I would like to inform you about our next presentation. The next presentation will be held on 7th October 2022. The next presenter will be Dr. Vijay Padur, and he will deliver a talk on integration of Alzheimer's disease genetics and myeloid genomics, identifies disease risk regulatory elements and genes. Thank you all for being here and for your kind attention. Hope to see you all at the upcoming presentation. Thank you again.